The rain was hammering the parking lot when Ethan Cole pulled out his cracked phone, hands shaking, and wrote the note anyway. He could have driven off. Nobody saw him. The lot was empty. The night was black, and he had exactly $11.40 in his bank account. But he tucked that piece of paper under the wiper of a $90,000 Mercedes, a car worth more than everything he owned combined, and walked away. What happened next? That CEO didn't just call him. She hunted him down. And what she demanded from a broken, exhausted Navy dad would shake him to his core. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You won't want to miss where this goes. The night Ethan Cole's life changed forever. He was running on 4 hours of sleep, a gas station sandwich he hadn't finished, and the particular kind of exhaustion that doesn't just live in your muscles. It moves into your chest and sets up permanent residence. He'd just clocked out of his third job of the day. Third, not second. Third. The first was a 6 a.m. shift loading freight at the Harmon Avenue Distribution Center, where the dock supervisor called him Navy Boy, like it was an insult, and the fluorescent lights flickered so badly that by 9 in the morning, your eyes already felt like sandpaper. The second was 4 hours at an auto parts counter in Clarkson, where Ethan knew enough about engines to help half the mechanics in the county, but got paid $11.50 an hour and wasn't allowed to sit down. The third, the one that always went the latest, was a maintenance position at the Westgate Commercial Complex, where he mopped floors, replaced light bulbs, unclogged drains, and did the kind of work that makes invisible men out of the people doing it. He was 41 years old. He was built like someone had stacked hard years on top of each other until they formed a person. He had a jaw that looked like it had been in a few arguments and dark circles under his eyes that had stopped being temporary about 18 months ago. He'd served 12 years in the United States Navy as an electronics warfare technician, deployed twice, cited twice for excellence under fire, and honorably discharged 3 years back when his wife Claire was diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer. She fought for 14 months. She lost. And Ethan came home to a 7-year-old boy named Noah, who still slept with the lights on and asked too many questions about heaven. Now Noah was 9, and Ethan worked 3 jobs to keep the lights on in a 2-bedroom apartment in South Millfield, to pay for Noah's asthma medication, to keep the 2009 Honda CR-V running that was currently sitting in the Westgate parking lot with a front left headlight that flickered when you hit a pothole. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in November. Ethan walked out the back entrance of the Westgate building, duffel bag over one shoulder, the industrial smell of bleach still on his hands even though he'd washed them twice. His breath came out in small clouds. He was thinking about Noah, specifically about the school project Noah had mentioned that morning. Something about the solar system, and how Ethan had said, "We'll work on it this weekend, buddy," and how Noah had looked at him with those careful eyes that knew better than to push, but hoped anyway. He was thinking about that look when he turned the corner in the parking lot and felt the soft thud of his rear bumper connecting with something solid. He stopped. He stepped out of the car before the engine was fully off. The parking lot lights in that section were half dead, throwing more shadow than light. But even in the dark, Ethan could see the damage. His rear bumper had caught the front corner panel of the car parked behind him, a vehicle that had no business being in a commercial maintenance lot at midnight. It was a Mercedes-Benz S-Class slate gray, the kind of car that had that particular gleam that comes from being freshly detailed by someone who gets paid specifically to make it look that way. Ethan crouched down and looked at the damage. There was a crease along the front quarter panel, maybe 6 inches. Paint scraped clean down to the metal in 2 places. The chrome trim piece on the corner was bent. He stood up. He looked around the lot. One other car at the far end, nearly 400 feet away. No cameras visible on this section of the building, he knew, because he'd replaced 2 of them last month, and the third was still on the work order. Nobody saw. He stood there in the cold for a long moment. Then he went back to his CR-V, dug through the glove compartment past expired insurance cards and a broken phone charger, and a crayon drawing Noah had made of the 2 of them standing in front of what was apparently their apartment building, but looked more like a purple shoebox, and he found a receipt from the gas station. The back was blank. He sat in the driver's seat and wrote the note by the light of his phone. I hit your car pulling out. The damage is on the front right panel. I know this is a bad situation. I can't afford to pay for this outright, but I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen. My name is Ethan Cole. My number is below. I'll make it right however I can. I'm sorry." He folded it. He walked back to the Mercedes. He tucked it under the windshield wiper on the driver's side, pressing it down so the wind wouldn't take it. Then he drove home. He didn't sleep much. Not because of guilt, he'd done the right thing, and he knew it, but because doing the right thing doesn't stop the math from being terrifying. Repair on a panel like that on a car like that ran anywhere from $1,800 to $4,500, depending on what was underneath. He had $11.40. He had a 2009 Honda and 3 jobs and a son who needed asthma medication refilled before the 15th. He lay in the dark and did the math about 40 different ways, and it came out broken every time. At 6:15, his alarm went off. He got up. He made Noah oatmeal with the brown sugar Noah liked. He checked Noah's backpack, signed a permission slip he'd almost forgotten about, and drove Noah to school on the way to the distribution center. "Dad," Noah said from the back seat, "do you think Saturn's rings are made of ice or rocks?" "Both," Ethan said. "Scientists think it's mostly ice and rock fragments. Some pieces are as small as a grain of sand, some as big as a house." Noah thought about this. A house-sized piece of ice floating in space. Floating and spinning, going about 53,000 miles an hour. That's so fast. It is. "Dad." "Yeah, buddy." "You look tired." Ethan glanced in the rearview mirror. Noah was looking at him with those careful eyes. 9 years old and already reading a room like a man twice his age. Something in Ethan's chest shifted that particular ache that comes from loving someone so much it almost hurts to look at them. "I'm okay," Ethan said. "Had some stuff on my mind last night." "What kind of stuff?" "Grown-up stuff. Nothing you need to worry about." Noah accepted this with the particular patience of a child who has learned that some doors don't open when you knock on them. He went back to looking out the window at the cold November streets sliding past. Ethan's phone rang at 8:43 a.m. while he was on the loading dock at the distribution center guiding a pallet jack through a narrow aisle. He almost didn't answer an unknown number, and he got enough spam calls that his instinct was to let it go to voicemail. But something made him stop the pallet jack and pull the phone out. "This is Ethan." There was a brief pause. Then a voice measured clear with the kind of composure that didn't need volume to carry authority. Said, "Mr. Cole, my name is Marianne Cross. I believe you left a note on my car last night." Ethan felt his stomach drop about 6 inches. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I did." It's a very polite note. He wasn't sure what the correct response to that was, so he said nothing. "Most people," she continued, "would have driven away. The parking lot cameras in that section haven't been operational for 3 weeks. I checked this morning." "I know," Ethan said. "I replaced 2 of them last month. The 3rd one's been on the work order." Another pause longer this time. "You work at Westgate?" "Night maintenance." "Yes, ma'am." "How long?" 8 months. "And your other jobs?" Ethan paused. "I'm not sure how you know about those." "Your note said you can't afford to pay outright, but that you'll make it right however you can. That tells me you're not the kind of man who makes excuses, but that you're also in a difficult financial situation. The kind of difficult that doesn't come from one job." She said it matter-of-factly, not unkindly. "I'm a businesswoman, Mr. Cole. I read between lines for a living." Bo. Ethan leaned against the dock wall. Around him, the freight was moving forklifts, beeping his dock supervisor, eyeing him from 30 feet away, with an expression that said, "This better be quick." 3 jobs, Ethan said. Freight loading in the morning, parts counter in the afternoon, maintenance at night. Every day. 6 days a week. Sundays I'm with my son. You have a son. 9 years old. His name's Noah. His mother. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. She passed. 2 years ago. The silence on the line was different this time. Not calculating. Something closer to human. "I'm sorry," Marianne Cross said, and she sounded like she meant it. "Thank you," Ethan said. "Mr. Cole, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to answer me honestly." "I'll do my best." "Why didn't you drive away?" Ethan looked across the loading dock. His supervisor was walking toward him now, clipboard in hand, the universal signal for wrap it up. Ethan held up one finger, a gesture that said 1 minute, and turned slightly away. "Because my son is 9 years old," he said. "And in about 4 years, he's going to be old enough to start watching what I do, more than he listens to what I say. And I don't want the thing he watches to be a man who drives away when he scrapes a stranger's car in the dark." He paused. "That's really all there is to it." The silence stretched out long enough that Ethan thought maybe the call had dropped. Then Marianne Cross said, "I'd like to meet with you." "Ma'am?" "In person. I have some questions I'd rather ask face to face." Her voice had shifted, still composed, still controlled, but with something underneath it now. An edge of purpose. Like someone who'd just made a decision and wasn't second-guessing it. "I'm not going to make you pay for the damage, Mr. Cole. The car is insured, and the repair is a rounding error on my monthly expenses. What I'm interested in is something else entirely." Ethan's dock supervisor arrived beside him and pointed at the pallet jack, with the expression of a man who had been doing this for 20 years and had run completely out of patience. Ethan nodded once, held up his index finger again. "When?" He said into the phone. "Friday, noon, my office." She gave him an address on Pemberton Avenue, the kind of address that came with a building that had its name engraved in the facade. "Can you make that work?" 3 jobs, Friday noon. The parts counter shift ran until 2. "I'll make it work," Ethan said. "Good." Another pause. Then quietly, almost as an afterthought, "For what it's worth. Mr. Cole, what you did last night took character. I've dealt with a lot of people in a lot of situations. Character is rarer than most people think." She ended the call. Ethan stood there for a second, phone in hand, staring at nothing in particular. "Cole?" His supervisor was pointing at the pallet jack like it had personally offended him. "We got 12 pallets to move before 10 o'clock, and you're standing there like you're waiting for a bus." "Sorry, Ray." Ethan pocketed his phone and moved, but for the first time in months, maybe longer, the exhaustion in his chest had shifted slightly. Just slightly. Like something had cracked open a window in a room that had been sealed too long. He didn't tell anyone about the call. Not because he was secretive by nature, but because he'd learned somewhere along the way that talking about things too early had a way of jinxing them. Or worse, inviting the kind of advice that came from people who meant well, but who ultimately didn't know his situation, his options, or the particular weight of what it meant to be raising a 9-year-old alone on 3 jobs and a prayer. He did call his neighbor Mrs. Paulette Okafor, a retired schoolteacher who watched Noah in the evenings when Ethan's shifts ran late, and asked if she could cover Friday midday as well. She said yes before he finished the sentence. Paulette had adopted Ethan and Noah the way she adopted most things, quietly, completely, without making a fuss about it. Friday came. Ethan pressed his one good shirt. It was a dark blue Oxford he'd had since before his second deployment, and it still fit, because he hadn't had enough consistent meals in the last 2 years to gain any weight. He wore it with dark slacks he'd bought for Claire's funeral, and had only put on twice since. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror for a long moment, the circles under his eyes, the set of his jaw, the slight gray coming in at his temples, and thought about what he was walking into. He thought, "She said it's not about the money." He thought, "Then what is it about?" He thought, "I guess I'm about to find out." Cross Industrial Solutions occupied the top 3 floors of a 12-story building on Pemberton Avenue. The lobby was the kind of lobby that made a statement. Marble floors, high ceilings, a reception desk, staffed by a young man in a suit who looked at Ethan's blue Oxford shirt and slacks, with an expression carefully calibrated to be neutral, but wasn't quite. "Ethan Cole," Ethan said. "I have an appointment with Ms. Cross." The receptionist checked his screen. Yes, sir. 42nd floor. I'll let her assistant know you're here. The elevator moved fast and quiet. Ethan watched the numbers climb. Marianne Cross's assistant, a sharp, efficient woman named Diane, who moved like someone who had no time for anything that didn't move the day forward, met him at the elevator and walked him down a hallway to a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Marianne Cross was standing at one of those windows when he walked in. She was somewhere in her early 50s, lean and precise in the way that spoke of discipline rather than vanity. Dark hair, silver at the temples, pulled back cleanly, the kind of face that had weathered things and come out sharper for it. She was wearing a charcoal blazer over a white blouse, and she turned when he entered with the unhurried movement of someone who didn't need to rush to establish authority. She extended her hand. "Mr. Cole, thank you for coming. Thank you for the invitation." He shook her hand, firm grip, direct eye contact. He'd been trained to shake hands like he meant it, and he always had. She gestured to the chairs across from her desk, and they both sat. "I'll get straight to it," she said. "I've run Cross Industrial Solutions for 11 years. We design, manufacture, and maintain industrial processing systems primarily for the food production, pharmaceutical, and automotive sectors. We have 214 employees, 4 facilities and contracts with some of the largest manufacturers on the eastern seaboard." She said this not to impress him, but to establish context clearly and efficiently. "I've interviewed thousands of people in my career, Mr. Cole. I've hired hundreds. I've made good hires and bad hires and learned from both." "Okay," Ethan said. He wasn't sure yet where the runway was on this conversation. "I have a maintenance and systems technician position that has been open for 6 weeks," she continued. "It pays $62,000 a year with full benefits, including health, dental, and vision. The role involves oversight of our facility equipment, diagnostic work, preventive maintenance, responding to system anomalies. It requires someone who understands how complex machinery behaves and what it means when it doesn't behave." She paused. "What was your Navy specialty?" "Electronics warfare technician," Ethan said. "EW. I spent 12 years managing and maintaining complex integrated systems, radar communications, electronic countermeasures. If it had circuits wiring or sensors, I was responsible for keeping it alive in conditions that didn't forgive failure." Marianne Cross nodded once. The kind of nod that means, "That's what I thought." "You left a note on my car," she said, "in a dark parking lot, at midnight, when no one was watching, when you could barely afford to write the note, let alone pay for what it represented." She leaned forward slightly. "That tells me more about how you operate under pressure than any resume I've ever read." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "I appreciate that," he said carefully. "But I have to be honest with you. I'm not sure I'm the right fit for a position like this based on leaving a note." "I'm not hiring you because of the note," she said. "I'm considering you because of the note. There's a difference." She pulled a folder from the side of her desk. He hadn't noticed it until now, and opened it. "I had Diane do some checking after our call. 12 years, Navy electronics warfare, 2 deployments, commendations for both. Night school for 2 semesters studying industrial systems before your wife got sick and you had to stop. 3 years working maintenance and mechanical support in positions none of which come close to using what you know." She closed the folder. "You're overqualified for every job you currently hold." Ethan said nothing. "And yet you left a note," she said. "Because that's the kind of man you are. And I need that kind of man on my floor." He looked at her for a long moment. There was something both extraordinary and quietly terrifying about being seen this clearly by someone he'd met 6 minutes ago. "You understand I have 0 experience in industrial processing," he said. "You have 12 years of experience keeping complex integrated systems operational in combat conditions. My systems don't get shot at." The corner of her mouth moved slightly. "Usually. And if I don't work out, then I'll know within 60 days and we'll have an honest conversation about it. That's the standard probationary period for the role." She looked at him evenly. "But I don't think that's what's going to happen." Ethan sat with it. He did the math again, the different kind of math this time. Not the terrifying kind. The other kind. $62,000. Full benefits. Noah's asthma medication covered. One job instead of three. Sundays and evenings. Time. He thought about Noah asking if Saturn's rings were made of ice. He thought about a 9-year-old who slept with the lights on and watched his father too carefully. "I'd need 2 weeks to give notice at my current positions," he said. Marianne Cross nodded. "That's reasonable." "And I want to be clear about something," Ethan said. He met her eyes directly and held them. "I won't cut corners. I won't look the other way on something I think is wrong because it's inconvenient. I won't tell you what you want to hear if what you need to hear is something different. That's not a personality quirk, that's just who I am. If that's going to be a problem, you should probably know it now." Marianne Cross looked at him for a moment. Then she did something he hadn't expected. She smiled, not a polished executive smile, a real one. Brief, but real. "Mr. Cole," she said, "that is exactly why you're sitting in that chair." She extended her hand again across the desk. Ethan Cole looked at it. He thought about $11.40. He thought about a crumpled gas station receipt and a parking lot in the rain. He thought about a boy who asked questions about ice rings, 53,000 miles an hour in space. He reached out and shook Marianne Cross's hand. And just like that, in a corner office 42 floors above the street on a gray Friday in November, the first real door Ethan Cole had seen in 2 years swung open. He had no way of knowing yet what was waiting on the other side of it. Ethan gave his notices on Monday. Ray at the distribution center took it the way Ray took most things, with a clipboard in his hand and an expression that suggested he'd already moved on before Ethan finished the sentence. The parts counter manager, a decent enough man named Phil, who smelled perpetually of motor oil and spearmint gum, shook his hand and said he was sorry to lose him, but that he understood. The Westgate supervisor, a tired man named Gerald, who managed 14 maintenance workers and forgot most of their names, looked almost relieved, which told Ethan everything he'd ever needed to know about how valued he'd felt there. He told Noah that night over dinner. He kept it simple. He said he was starting a new job, a better one that paid more and had better hours, and that starting soon, Ethan would be home for dinner most nights instead of Mrs. Okafor's apartment. Noah looked up from his pasta. Every night. Most nights, barring something unusual. Noah processed this with the careful deliberateness of a child who had learned not to get his hopes too high, too fast. "How much more does it pay?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "That's a very direct question." "You always say it's important to ask direct questions." "I do say that." Ethan set his fork down. "It pays more than enough. Enough that we don't have to count things as carefully as we've been counting them." Noah looked at him for another moment. Then he went back to his pasta. But a few seconds later, quietly without looking up, he said, "Good." Just that. Good. One word, and it carried the weight of 2 years. Ethan had to look at the wall for a second before he could trust his face again. The first morning at Cross Industrial Solutions, Ethan arrived 7 minutes early. He'd pressed the blue Oxford again, but Diane Marianne's assistant had apparently anticipated this and left a Cross Industrial polo shirt in his size in the HR office, along with his badge and onboarding paperwork. He changed in the bathroom, clipped the badge, and reported to the production floor at 7:53 a.m. The floor manager's name was Dale Hutchins. Dale was a broad-shouldered man in his mid-40s with a gray mustache and the permanently cautious expression of someone who'd seen new hires come and go often enough to have stopped forming opinions about them before the 90-day mark. He gave Ethan a handshake, a hard hat, and a tour that lasted 40 minutes and covered 4 distinct production zones. 2 quality control stations, a climate-controlled parts room, and a central monitoring hub where 6 screens tracked real-time operational data from every piece of major equipment on the floor. Ethan didn't say much during the tour. He asked 2 questions, both specific, both technical, and Dale's cautious expression shifted almost imperceptibly toward something that wasn't quite interest, but was in that general direction. "You done industrial work before?" Dale asked on the way back from the parts room. "Navy, electronics and systems, 12 years. Dale nodded slowly. "It's different here. Less extreme conditions, but the diagnostic logic is the same. If a system's behaving wrong, something's telling you why. You just have to know how to listen. I know how to listen, Ethan said. The second person Ethan met that morning was Marcus Webb, a 38-year-old line technician who'd been at Cross Industrial for 6 years and had the relaxed, unhurried competence of someone who knew his job cold and didn't need to prove it. Marcus was the kind of man who assessed people quickly, filed his conclusions, and didn't revisit them unless given a compelling reason. He extended a hand when Dale introduced them, shook it once and said, "You need anything, ask. Most guys on the floor are decent. There's one you'll want to read fast." Ethan understood the kind of warning that didn't come with a name attached. "I'll keep that in mind," he said. He found out which one Marcus meant before lunch. Warren Hodge ran the Advanced Systems Oversight Unit, a 6-person team, responsible for the most technically complex equipment on the floor, including the twin hydraulic press arrays that were the backbone of the facility's output. He was 52, 18 years with the company, and carried himself with the particular authority of a man who had never once been passed over for anything he'd wanted until recently. Ethan would later learn when a promotion he'd expected had gone to someone else, and when budget restructuring had trimmed his team from 8 to 6, and when a new hire had been brought in, not through channels he recognized or respected, but through the direct personal interest of the CEO herself. Warren Hodge walked up to Ethan at 11:15 while Ethan was reviewing operational logs on the monitoring hub screens and stood just close enough that the proximity was a statement. "You're the new guy," Warren said. Ethan turned. "Ethan Cole." He offered his hand. Warren looked at it for half a second longer than was necessary before shaking it. His grip was the kind that tried to communicate hierarchy without saying anything out loud. "Warren Hodge, Advanced Systems, 18 years. He said it the way you'd say I was here before you were born." "Good to meet you," Ethan said. "What's your background?" "Navy, electronics warfare, 12 years. Warren's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. A slight repositioning. "So no industrial experience?" "Not civilian industrial, no." "And yet here you are." Warren looked at the monitoring screens, then back at Ethan. "Dale putting you on general maintenance to start?" "That's the plan." "Smart." The word carried a meaning that had nothing to do with its dictionary definition. Learn the floor before you decide you understand it. Ethan held his gaze. He'd dealt with Warren Hodge 100 times over 12 years in the Navy, different names, same architecture. Men who built their identity around institutional seniority and read every new arrival as a potential threat. He'd learned that the worst thing you could do was position yourself in opposition too early, and the second worst thing was to look like you were trying too hard to be liked. "That's exactly what I intend to do," Ethan said evenly and without apology. Warren held the eye contact for another beat. Then he turned and walked back toward the press arrays. Marcus appeared at Ethan's elbow about 30 seconds later. "That's Warren," he said, not looking up from his clipboard. "Yeah," Ethan said. "I figured." The first week was about learning. Not learning in the classroom sense, learning in the way Ethan had always learned best, by watching, by listening, by understanding a system's personality before putting his hands on it. Every machine had a personality. That was something they'd drilled into him in the Navy, and that he'd found to be true in every mechanical context he'd ever worked in. A system told you things if you paid attention: the frequency of a vibration, the timing of a pressure fluctuation, the way a temperature reading climbed 2 degrees slower than it should. You had to be willing to hear it. He started building a mental map of the floor in the first 3 days. By Thursday, he'd identified 4 pieces of equipment that ran in ways that didn't quite match their operational parameters, not badly enough to trigger alarms, but differently enough to notice if you were paying the right kind of attention. He flagged 2 of them to Dale, careful to frame it as a question rather than a finding. "I'm seeing this reading here. Is that normal for this unit?" Dale checked, came back an hour later, and said that unit had been running slightly irregular for 2 months and was on the schedule for next quarter's maintenance window. "You caught that in 3 days, Dale said. "I've been watching the logs. It's subtle." Dale looked at him in a way that updated something. Not dramatically, but it updated. The second week, Ethan was assigned to shadow Emma Reardon on the quality control side of the floor. Emma was 32, precise, efficient, and deeply skeptical of Ethan in the way that had nothing to do with him personally, and everything to do with the fact that she'd watched 3 previous new hires fail to last the month, and had stopped spending social energy on people she wasn't sure would stick around. "Do you actually know what you're looking at?" she asked him on the first morning, standing at the QC station with a tablet in her hand. "Or are you still in the nodding along phase?" Ethan looked at the tablet screen she was holding toward him. It showed a production run readout. "Your viscosity readings on Unit 4 are trending 3% low over the last 6 hours. Your pressure curve on the inlet valve is compensating for it, which is why it hasn't flagged. But if the viscosity keeps dropping, the compensation is going to overextend the valve actuator, and you'll get a false positive pressure reading on the downstream sensor." Emma looked at him. Then she looked at the tablet, then back at him. "How long did that take you to see?" she asked. "About 4 minutes." She didn't say anything warm. That wasn't Emma's mode. But she turned back to the tablet and pulled up the actuator history. And she didn't question him again that day. By the end of the second week, Ethan had a working relationship with Marcus and a professional détente with Emma. He had a respectful distance from Warren, which was the best he could reasonably hope for at this stage. He had Dale's cautious, growing regard, and the quiet acknowledgement of 2 or 3 other floor workers who'd noticed that the new guy wasn't just filling a seat. He also had, for the first time in 2 years, dinner at home 4 nights out of 5. That was the thing nobody at Cross Industrial saw, and nobody would ever fully understand. The job was important. The work mattered. But what it gave him at home, that was the part that meant something different. Noah at the kitchen table showing him a drawing of Saturn's rings. Noah asking questions about how hydraulic presses worked after hearing Ethan mention them over dinner, and then listening to the whole explanation with total focused attention. Noah sleeping with the light off for the first time in 8 months. That one Ethan noticed at 11 p.m. when he checked on him, the lamp on the nightstand off the room dark, his son breathing quietly in a way that looked for the first time in a long time like actual peace. He stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then he went to bed himself and slept almost all the way through to morning. He ran into Marianne Cross in the hallway outside the 3rd floor conference room on a Thursday afternoon in his 3rd week. He was carrying a maintenance diagnostic report for Dale. She was walking with Diane and 2 people in suits who had the look of people whose time was budgeted in 15-minute blocks. She saw him, and she slowed without breaking stride, the way only people who are very practiced at multitasking can manage. "Mr. Cole," she said. "Miss Cross. How's the floor?" "Good. Learning a lot." She glanced at the folder in his hand. Something in her eyes moved. "Good," she said and moved on. It was 14 seconds of interaction. But he caught Warren Hodge watching it from 30 feet down the hall, and the look on Warren's face was the particular look of a man recalculating. The trouble started properly in week 4. Cross Industrial had a major client inspection, scheduled a representative from Delco Pharmaceutical. One of the company's biggest contracts was coming to evaluate the facility's compliance with new processing standards. The inspection would cover equipment certification, operational protocols, and safety standards. It was by every measure a high-stakes visit, and the whole floor knew it. Marianne had assigned a prep team to oversee readiness. Dale was running it. Warren was the senior technical voice on that team, which was appropriate given his experience and his unit's responsibility for the most critical systems. Ethan was not on the prep team. He was still in his probationary period, still proving himself. But he was on the floor every day while the preparation happened, and he was paying attention. The way he always paid attention. On the Tuesday before the inspection, running a routine check of the hydraulic press array as part of his daily responsibilities, Ethan noticed something. It started as a sound. Not a loud sound, not the kind that sets off alarms or makes people stop and look. A subtle irregularity in the cycling rhythm of Press Unit B, a half-beat variation in the hydraulic return stroke that wasn't there on Monday. He stopped. He listened to it for 30 seconds. Then he ran the diagnostic terminal beside the unit and pulled up the real-time pressure data. The numbers were within operational range, Technically. But the pattern in the numbers, the shape of the pressure cycle over time, was wrong in the way that Ethan had learned to read as a precursor rather than a problem. In the Navy, they'd called it reading the weather. The storm wasn't here yet, but you could feel it coming if you knew what cold air felt like before a front moved in. He flagged it to Dale immediately. Dale ran his own check. "Numbers look okay," Dale said. "The numbers are okay," Ethan said. "The pattern isn't. The return stroke is inconsistent. That means either the hydraulic fluid is showing early viscosity breakdown, under operating temperature, or there's a microfracture developing in the accumulator bladder. Either way, under full load during a formal inspection, this unit is going to behave differently than it does right now." Dale looked at the screen. He looked at Ethan. He ran the numbers again. "I'm going to take this to Warren," Dale said. What happened next was the part of the story that said something about every person involved. Warren looked at the data. He asked Dale where the flag came from. When Dale said it was Ethan's catch, Warren's jaw tightened by a fraction of a degree. He studied the terminal for 2 full minutes, and then he said, "The numbers are in range. We're 4 days out from the Delco inspection. We shut down Unit B for a diagnostic, and we throw off the entire prep timeline. The inspection team is going to see a partially operational press array instead of full certification." "If the unit fails during the inspection under full load," Ethan said, because he was standing right there, "the inspection team is going to see something a lot worse than a partially operational array." Warren turned and looked at him with the particular precision of someone who had been waiting for an excuse and just been given one. "You've been here 4 weeks," he said. "You've never run a Delco inspection. You don't know what these clients look at and what they look past. And you certainly don't have the track record here to be recommending that we shut down our primary production unit 4 days before the biggest client visit of the quarter." "I'm not making a recommendation based on track record," Ethan said. "I'm making it based on what the data pattern says." "Data pattern." Warren's voice was perfectly flat. "You've been reading hydraulic presses for a month, Cole. I've been running this floor for 18 years. The unit is within spec. We leave it running." The room, it was just the 3 of them, in the small tech office adjacent to the press floor, went very quiet. Ethan looked at Dale. Dale was the kind of man who didn't like conflict, who made good decisions slowly and bad decisions fast when pressured. He could see Dale calculating, weighing, measuring Warren's 18 years against 4 weeks and not finding it close. "Dale," Ethan said, keeping his voice level, "I want to go on record that I'm recommending we pull Unit B for a diagnostic before the inspection. I'm asking you to document that recommendation." Dale shifted uncomfortably. "I hear you, Ethan. I know you hear me. I'm asking you to write it down." That was a specific ask. In every operational environment Ethan had ever worked in, military or civilian, asking someone to document a safety recommendation was serious. It meant if I'm wrong, you can show I was wrong. And if I'm right, everyone should know the warning was given. Warren's eyes went cold. "You're a probationary hire making waves 4 weeks in," he said quietly. "Think carefully about how that reads." Ethan looked at him. "I think about integrity first, politics second. That order doesn't change based on where I am on the org chart." Nobody in the room said anything for 3 long seconds. Then Warren turned to Dale. "The unit stays online. I'm the senior technical authority on this prep team. That's my call." He walked out. Dale looked at Ethan. His expression was somewhere between sympathetic and exhausted. "I'll note your recommendation in the daily log," Dale said. "But Warren runs the prep." "Ethan, my hands are—" "I know," Ethan said. "That's all I'm asking." He went back to the floor. He did his job for the rest of the day. Thorough, quiet professional. He didn't escalate to Marianne. He didn't make noise. He did the work, and he let it sit. But that night at home, after Noah was in bed, he sat at the kitchen table for a long time with a cup of coffee going cold in front of him, and he thought about Unit B. He thought about the sound it made. He thought about what was underneath that sound. He thought about Claire in the hospital in the weeks before the end, When the doctors had said everything was within acceptable parameters, and he'd known, had felt in the particular way you feel things about someone you love, that no chart or monitor can capture that something was shifting. He'd pushed. He'd asked questions. He'd been told he was anxious, that he was not a medical professional, that the data was clear. The data had been clear. She was gone 6 weeks later. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Then he went to bed. He lay in the dark. And he made a decision that he knew might cost him the best opportunity he'd had in years, but that he understood in the place in himself that didn't negotiate with fear he was going to make regardless. If that unit showed another anomaly before Thursday, he was going directly to Marianne Cross. He was not going to drive away. He never did. The anomaly showed up again on Wednesday morning at 6:47 a.m. Ethan had come in early 40 minutes before his shift started because he hadn't slept well, and because the alternative was lying in the dark thinking about hydraulic accumulators, which was not a productive use of darkness. He went straight to Press Unit B before he even put his lunch in the break room, pulled up the diagnostic terminal, and ran a full-cycle read. The pressure variance was worse. Not dramatically worse. Not the kind of worse that triggers automated alarms or makes a supervisor look up from their desk, but the pattern had progressed. The inconsistency in the return stroke had deepened by another fractional degree, and now there was a secondary signature he hadn't seen Tuesday. A microspike in the hydraulic fluid temperature at the accumulator junction, lasting less than 2 seconds per cycle, gone before any standard monitoring threshold would catch it. Ethan stood at that terminal for 4 full minutes. He thought about Warren's voice. "You've been here 4 weeks. He thought about Dale's expression, that specific mix of sympathy and institutional cowardice that good men wore when they were caught between what was right and what was safe for them personally. He thought about the Delco inspection tomorrow morning, the client representative flying in Marianne's reputation, on the line the entire quarter's contract value sitting on the performance of a floor that was supposed to be immaculate. Then he thought about the temperature spike. Less than 2 seconds. Gone before it registered. The kind of thing you'd never see unless you were watching for it specifically. He pulled out his phone and took photos of the terminal screen. 3 shots, different angles, time-stamped. Then he went and found Dale. Dale was in the supervisor's office with a coffee and a pre-inspection checklist, already wearing the expression of a man who had too much to do before noon. He looked up when Ethan walked in, and his face did something complicated. "Cole, I need you to look at something." Ethan set his phone on the desk screen, up showing the first photo. The variance deepened overnight. There's now a secondary thermal spike at the accumulator junction. It's cycling with the return stroke. Dale looked at the photo. He picked up the phone and looked more carefully. "That's within operating temp," he said. "It's within operating temp for 2 seconds, and then it's gone. The sensor log doesn't hold sub-threshold spikes, they clear automatically, which means by the time the Delco team runs their certification check tomorrow, there'll be no record of it." Dale set the phone down. He rubbed the back of his neck. "Ethan, if the accumulator bladder is compromised," Ethan said, "and that unit goes to full operating load during tomorrow's inspection, not the reduced load it's been running at during prep, you're looking at a potential hydraulic failure. Best case, the unit shuts itself down mid-demonstration, and the inspection is a disaster. Worst case..." He stopped. He didn't finish the sentence because he didn't need to. Dale knew what hydraulic failures looked like under full load. Everyone who'd been on an industrial floor long enough knew. Dale stared at the checklist in front of him for a long moment. Then he looked up. "I have to bring Warren in." "I know. He's not going to like this." "I know that too." Dale picked up his radio. Warren arrived in the supervisor's office 4 minutes later. He looked at Ethan first, a single-level look that communicated an entire conversation in about a half second, and then he looked at Dale. "What?" Dale explained. He was careful, neutral, professional about it. He showed Warren the photos. He walked through Ethan's reading of the pattern. He did everything right, and Ethan noted that Dale, whatever his weaknesses under pressure, was trying to do right by the facts, even when the facts were inconvenient. Warren listened. He looked at the photos. He pulled up the official monitoring log on Dale's desktop and scrolled through it for 90 seconds without speaking. Then he said, "The log is clean." "The log doesn't capture sub-threshold spikes," Ethan said. "They clear inside the 2-second window." "So what you're telling me," Warren said, "is that you have a reading that doesn't appear in our official system, captured on your personal phone camera, that you are now using to recommend shutting down our primary production unit 12 hours before the most important client inspection of the year." Ethan didn't flinch. "Yes, that's exactly what I'm telling you." Warren's composure was remarkable in its way. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't lose his professionalism. He was far too seasoned for that. What he did instead was turn to Dale with an air of measured patience that implied Ethan wasn't worth addressing directly anymore. "Dale, I need you to make a decision right now about what kind of operation you want to run. We can shut down Unit B based on a 4-week hires pattern reading that contradicts every piece of official diagnostic data we have rescheduled tomorrow's inspection, and explain to Mary Ann Cross and the Delco team why we pulled our primary unit the night before certification. Or we can trust 18 years of facility experience and 24 hours of prep work and run the inspection as planned." He paused. "I know which one I'm recommending." The room was quiet. Dale looked at the checklist. He looked at the phone photos. He looked at Ethan, and then at Warren, and then at his coffee like it might have an answer in it. "Warren," Ethan said, and something in the way he said it made both men look at him. His voice was completely calm, not aggressive, not desperate. Just clear the way things get clear when a person has made peace with whatever it's going to cost them. "I've been in situations where the data looked fine, right up until the moment it wasn't. I've been on systems where every official reading said green, and something underneath was already failing. I know what that pattern feels like." He paused. "I'm not asking you to trust me over 18 years of experience. I'm asking you to give the unit 2 hours for a hands-on inspection before you make the final call. 2 hours. If we pop the access panel on the accumulator housing and everything looks clean, I'll put that in writing and I'll never mention it again." Warren stared at him. 2 hours, Ethan said, against the possibility that I'm right. The silence lasted long enough to become its own kind of answer. And then Mary Ann Cross appeared in the doorway. None of them had heard her coming. She had a way of moving through the building that the floor workers had come to recognize, not dramatic, not announced, just suddenly present in a way that clarified that she was always closer to the operation than people assumed. She stood in the doorway of the supervisor's office with her blazer on and a tablet in her hand, and she looked at the three of them with an expression that read the room in about 4 seconds. "Why does this office feel like a deposition?" she said. Nobody answered immediately. She looked at Ethan. Something in the quality of his stillness told her what she needed to know about who had called the meeting and why. She looked at Dale. "Dale." Dale told her. Again, careful, neutral, thorough. He showed her the phone photos. He explained both positions. Mary Ann listened without interrupting. When Dale finished, she stood there for a moment, looking at the photos on Ethan's phone, and then she set it down on the desk and looked at Warren. "Warren, your position is that the unit is within spec and should run tomorrow." "Yes," Warren said. "Every piece of official diagnostic data supports." "I heard Dale." She looked at Ethan. "Your position is that the pattern suggests a developing failure that the official data won't catch in time." "Yes," Ethan said. "And you're asking for 2 hours to do a physical inspection of the accumulator?" "Yes, ma'am." Mary Ann was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that isn't uncertainty, it's calculation. Fast, thorough, experienced calculation. "Warren," she said, "how long have we had Unit B running at reduced load during prep?" Warren paused. 4 days. "And tomorrow's inspection runs it at full operational load." "Standard certification protocol, yes." "So the stress differential between what it's been running at and what it runs at tomorrow is significant." It wasn't quite a question, but Warren answered it anyway. "The unit has run full load certifications a dozen times. It's a proven system." "It's a proven system," Mary Ann said, with a 4-week technician flagging an anomaly that an 18-year veteran didn't catch. She let that sit for exactly 1 second. "That's not an insult, Warren. That's information." She picked up Ethan's phone one more time, looked at the timestamp on the photos. He came in early, before his shift, to check. Warren's jaw tightened. The faintest degree, but it was there. Mary Ann set the phone down. "We pull Unit B, 2-hour physical inspection. If it's clean, we run the certification tomorrow with full documentation that we conducted an additional pre-inspection check. That's not a weakness, that's diligence. If it's not clean," she looked at Dale, "then we call Delco this morning and we reschedule. We tell them we identified a potential equipment concern 24 hours out and chose to address it rather than run a compromised certification. Any client worth keeping respects that call." Warren said nothing. "Ethan," Mary Ann said, and her voice shifted slightly. Not warmer exactly, but more direct, which for Mary Ann Cross was its own kind of warmth. "You're leading the inspection team." Warren's head turned. "He flagged it," Mary Ann said simply. "He should be the one to open it." She left. The 2 hours that followed were the most concentrated professional experience Ethan had had since leaving the Navy. He worked with a 3-person team, Marcus, who'd volunteered without being asked, a senior hydraulic tech named Briggs, who had 30 years of experience and the steady hands to match, and a younger mechanic named Torres, who didn't say much but worked fast and clean. They pulled the access panel on the accumulator housing at 8:12 a.m. Briggs saw it first. He was the one with his head inside the housing, and he went very still for a moment in the particular way of someone who has found what they were looking for and wishes they hadn't. "There it is," he said. The accumulator bladder had a stress fracture along its upper seam, not fully through, not yet, but far enough that the hydraulic fluid was micro-weeping at the apex of every pressure cycle. The temperature spike Ethan had seen on the monitor was the friction signature of that weep evaporating before it could accumulate. At reduced operating load, the unit could have run another week before the fracture progressed enough to trigger a visible failure. At full certification load, the load it would have run at during the Delco inspection, Briggs estimated 4 to 6 hours before full rupture. Briggs climbed out of the housing and looked at Ethan with the straightforward respect of one technical professional recognizing another. "Good catch," he said. It was 3 words. It was enough. Ethan called Delco himself, at Mary Ann's direction, from the conference room on the 3rd floor. He explained the situation clearly and without embellishment. Equipment concern identified during final pre-inspection prep, elected to address it before certification, rather than run a compromised system. The Delco representative, a careful man named Feldstein, who had been doing facility certifications for 20 years, listened to the whole explanation and then said, "You caught it the day before." "Yes, sir." "And you called us instead of running it and hoping it held." "Yes, sir." A pause. "That's the right call, Mr. Cole. Some facilities don't make it. We'll reschedule for next week. And I'll make a note in our file that Cross Industrial flagged a safety concern proactively. That carries weight in our evaluation." Ethan thanked him and ended the call. He sat in the conference room alone for a moment. Just a moment. The weight of the morning settling through him. He thought about Unit B. He thought about full operating load and the Delco team standing in the facility, and what a hydraulic rupture under those conditions would have looked like, the sound of it, the fluid pressure, the potential for injury among anyone standing within range of the housing. He thought about Briggs's face when he saw the fracture. Then he got up and went back to the floor. Warren was standing near the press array when Ethan came through the door. He was watching the repair team work on the accumulator replacement, hands in his pockets. Expression unreadable in the way of a man doing significant internal work that he wasn't going to show anyone. Ethan walked past him. He wasn't going to make anything of it. He had no interest in an "I told you so." That wasn't what any of it had been about. But Warren spoke. "Cole." Ethan stopped, turned. Warren didn't look at him right away. He kept his eyes on the repair team for another second. Then he turned, and the expression on his face was one that Ethan suspected very few people had ever seen on it, the specific look of a man who is choosing honesty over pride. in a moment when pride would have been so much easier. "You were right," Warren said. Just that. No qualifier, no mitigation, no explanation of how the official data had been misleading or how anyone might have missed it. Just 2 words, flat and clean. Ethan looked at him. "Thank you," he said. "I'm still not sure about you," Warren said. "I want to be straight about that. I don't know yet what kind of man you are across the board. But on this..." He glanced back at the housing where Briggs was working. "You were right." Ethan nodded once. "That's all I needed it to be." He went back to work. By the end of the day, the story had moved through the floor, the way things move through a facility with 200 people, not through announcements or memos, but through the specific word-of-mouth velocity that comes from something real happening in front of witnesses. Marcus told 2 people. Briggs told 3. Torres told everyone in his lunch rotation. By 3 p.m., every person on the production floor knew that the new guy had flagged an accumulator fracture that would have blown during the Delco certification, and that he'd pushed for the inspection even when Warren Hodge had said to leave it running, and that Marianne Cross had backed him. The responses were varied. Some people updated their opinion of Ethan quickly and completely. Some updated it slowly, the way people update anything that requires them to revise a prior judgment. And some, the ones who'd been in Warren's corner by institutional loyalty rather than genuine conviction, went quiet in the particular way of people who are re-examining their allegiances without wanting anyone to notice. Emma found Ethan at the QC station near the end of the shift. She stood next to him for a moment without speaking, looking at the same terminal screen. Then she said without preamble or setup, "I told Marcus last week that you'd either last or you wouldn't, and I wasn't going to put money on which." "That seems reasonable," Ethan said. "I'd put money on it now," she said. And she walked away. He almost smiled. Almost. He was gathering his things in the locker room at 5:45 when Dale appeared in the doorway. Dale looked like a man who had spent a long day navigating between 2 currents and had arrived at the far bank somewhat waterlogged but still standing. "For what it's worth," Dale said, "I should have backed you harder this morning." Ethan looked at him. "You documented my recommendation. That's not the same as standing behind it." "No," Ethan agreed. "But it's what you could do in the position you were in, and I understood that." He zipped his bag. "You're a fair man, Dale. Fair is rarer than it looks from the outside." Dale absorbed this. "Marianne wants to see you. Tomorrow morning before the shift. 8 o'clock her office." Ethan didn't ask why. He had a sense of it, not the specifics, but the direction. He nodded. "I'll be there." He drove home through the late afternoon traffic, hands easy on the wheel, the city moving past in the particular amber light of a fall evening that had decided briefly to be beautiful about it. He was tired, the bone-deep tired that came from a day that had required everything. But it was a different kind of tired than the 3-job kind. That tiredness had been empty, like wringing out a cloth that had nothing left in it. This was the tiredness of a day that had actually meant something. He picked Noah up from Mrs. Okafor's at 6:15. Noah was at the kitchen table when they got home, working on the solar system project, a sheet of poster board covered in carefully drawn planets and handwritten facts in Noah's precise, slightly too large 9-year-old handwriting. "Saturn has 62 moons," Noah announced as Ethan came through the door. "That sounds right," Ethan said. "And its rings are 90% water ice." "I did not know that specific percentage." Noah looked up. He looked at Ethan, the way he always looked at him, that careful, thorough assessment that saw more than most adults managed. "You look like something happened today," he said. Ethan set his bag down and sat across from him at the table. "Something did. Good or bad?" Ethan thought about it. About the accumulator fracture, about the weeping hydraulic fluid and the temperature spike and Warren's expression in the supervisor's office, and the sound of Briggs saying "good catch" from inside the housing. "Good," he said. "Complicated, but good." Noah considered this. "Did you do the right thing?" Ethan looked at his son for a moment. 9-year-old poster board covered in planets, asking the most important question like it was the only one that mattered. "Yeah, buddy," he said. "I did." Noah nodded. Then he went back to his solar system. Ethan sat there at the table for a little while longer, watching him work the apartment quiet around them, the evening settling in through the windows. He thought about tomorrow morning. Marianne Cross's office. 8 a.m. He thought about what a man could build in 60 days if he had something solid to build on. Then he got up and made dinner, and the night moved forward ordinary and remarkable in equal measure the way the best nights always do. Marianne Cross's office at 8 in the morning had a different quality than it did at noon. The light came in at a lower angle through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and the city below was still working itself up to full-speed traffic moving with less certainty than it would by 10. She was already at her desk when Diane walked Ethan in, and she had 2 coffees on the corner of the desk in the particular way of someone who had thought about the meeting before it started. She gestured to the chair across from her. He sat. She looked at him for a moment, not uncomfortably, but with the directness that was simply how she engaged with people she took seriously. "How are you feeling this morning?" "Good," Ethan said. "Rested." "I find that hard to believe after yesterday." "It was a full day," he admitted. She slid one of the coffees toward him. He took it. She wrapped both hands around hers and leaned back slightly in her chair. "I want to talk about what happened," she said. "Not to relitigate it, it's done, and you were right, and the facility is safer for it. I want to talk about how it happened, the process of it." Ethan waited. "You came in early," she said, "before your shift, to check a unit you'd flagged the day before that was technically cleared. I wanted to see if the pattern had progressed." "It had." "Yes." "And when Warren said to leave it, you documented your position and then came back the next morning and checked again rather than accepting the outcome and moving on." "Moving on would have been easier," Ethan said. "It would have also been wrong." Marianne looked at her coffee, then she looked at him. "I've had good employees and great employees," she said. "The difference in my experience is not skill. Skill is table stakes if you can't do the job you're not having this conversation. The difference is what a person does when the right thing is inconvenient, when it costs them something." She paused. "Yesterday cost you something. It cost you whatever small amount of political capital you'd been building on that floor with Warren Hodge. It cost you the comfort of keeping your head down in your probationary period and not making waves. You paid that price without hesitating." "I didn't think of it as a price," Ethan said honestly. "I know," she said. "That's the whole point." She set her coffee down and opened a folder on her desk. It was thin, just a few pages. She turned it and pushed it toward him. "Your 60-day probationary period ends in 3 weeks. I'm not waiting 3 weeks." Ethan looked at the folder. It was an employment status document. His name at the top. The probationary checkbox was already cleared, a line drawn through it, and in the status field, someone had typed a single word, "confirmed." He looked up at her. "Full status as of today," she said. "Benefits active immediately. Salary review moved to the 90-day mark instead of 6 months." She let him read the page. "You've also been assigned to the Advanced Systems Oversight Unit effective next week." The weight of that landed slowly. Advanced Systems. Warren's unit. "Warren knows?" Ethan asked. "He will by 9 o'clock. "How is he going to take that?" Marianne's expression was measured. "Warren is a complicated man. He's been here 18 years, and he built a great deal of what this facility runs on. He's also been coasting on that legacy for the last 4 of those years in ways I've been patient about because his institutional knowledge is genuinely valuable." She folded her hands. "Yesterday was a reset for Warren. I believe he knows it. What he does with that reset is his choice. But I'm not going to delay your advancement because of his discomfort." Ethan sat with that for a moment. He thought about Warren in the locker room hallway. You were right, the precise, effortful honesty of it. "I don't want to be a source of ongoing conflict on the floor," he said. "If there's a way to bring Warren along rather than run past him." Marianne looked at him. Something moved in her eyes. Not surprise exactly, but a specific recognition. "You're concerned about him." "I think he's a man who's been told he's the most important person in the room for so long that he stopped asking whether it was still true. That's not a character flaw. It's a trap that catches good people." Ethan paused. "His hydraulic knowledge is real. His equipment instinct is real. He just couldn't see past the threat long enough to use it yesterday. Mary Ann was quiet for a moment. What would you suggest? Include him. Not defer to him, include him. Let him be part of what I'm doing rather than watching it happen without him. Men like Warren don't need to be diminished. They need to be redirected. She looked at him for a long moment. "You've been here 5 weeks," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "You're giving me management philosophy." "You asked," Ethan said simply. The corner of her mouth moved, just slightly. "So I did." She stood. He stood. She extended her hand. "Welcome to the permanent roster, Mr. Cole." He shook it. "Thank you for the opportunity, and for yesterday." "Thank you," she said, "for being the kind of man who makes an opportunity worth giving." He left the office with the folder under his arm and rode the elevator down to the floor, thinking about what it meant to have something confirmed. Not just the job. Something larger. Something that had been unsteady in him for 2 years since Claire, since the 3 jobs, since the particular kind of quiet desperation of being a man who knows his own worth but can't find a place that recognizes it. Something that had been sitting loose and rattling like a bolt in an empty housing. It felt just slightly like it was tightening. Warren was at his desk in the Advanced Systems office when Ethan knocked on the open door at 9:15. The call from Mary Ann had come through. Ethan could tell by the way Warren's jaw was set when he looked up. Not angry exactly. Not the volcanic version of it. The contained, quiet version that was in some ways harder to read. "You're coming to Advanced Systems," Warren said. "Starting next week, yes." "Mary Ann's decision." "Yes." Warren was quiet for a moment. He looked at his desk at the operational charts laid out in front of him, and then back up at Ethan. "I want to say something before this gets complicated." "All right. What I said yesterday that you were right, I meant it. But I also want you to understand something." He leaned back in his chair, and the body language shifted just enough to indicate this wasn't aggression, but something more effortful. "I've been the senior voice on this floor for a long time. Long enough that my opinion on equipment has been the last word more often than not. That's not arrogance, or it started out not being arrogance. It started out being accuracy." He paused. Somewhere in the last few years, accuracy started shading into assumption. I don't like admitting that. Ethan said nothing. He understood that what was happening right now required silence more than response. "I'm not going to make your life difficult," Warren said. "That's not who I am when I'm operating correctly. But I'm also not going to pretend this is comfortable." He met Ethan's eyes. "I need time to recalibrate. That's the most honest thing I can tell you." "That's all I'm asking for," Ethan said. "Time and honesty." He paused. "The rest of it I can work with, the rest of it." Warren nodded once, slowly. The nod of a man making a private decision that he was going to commit to, regardless of whether it was easy. "One thing," Warren said as Ethan turned to go. "Yeah. The accumulator bladder on Unit A has a service history that's about 6 months behind where it should be. I've been meaning to flag it." Ethan stopped, turned back. "I'll pull the maintenance record this afternoon." "Good." Warren looked back at his charts. "Welcome to Advanced Systems, Cole." The weeks that followed had a different texture than the first month. Not easier, the work in Advanced Systems was genuinely complex, and the learning curve was real and steep and didn't flatten out quickly. But it had direction. It had weight in the right way, the way work has weight when it matters beyond the paycheck. Ethan fell into a rhythm with Marcus and Emma, both of whom had moved from cautious assessment to something that functioned like genuine professional respect, the kind that doesn't require much ceremony because it's self-evident in how people work alongside each other. Marcus started consulting him on diagnostic questions with the ease of someone who'd decided to trust a colleague. Emma stopped testing him and started simply expecting competency, which was from Emma the closest thing to warmth she offered. With Warren, the recalibration happened slowly. First, it was professional distance with the edges sanded down, questions and answers without friction, shared observations about equipment behavior that neither of them had to push hard to make happen. Then, it became something slightly more Warren showing Ethan a piece of equipment history that gave context to a pattern Ethan had noticed. Ethan catching a detail in a pressure cycle and bringing it to Warren before making any recommendation, not from deference, but from the genuine recognition that Warren's 18 years held things worth consulting. "You're doing that on purpose," Warren said one afternoon after Ethan had brought him a diagnostic question he could have handled independently. "Doing what?" Ethan said. "Bringing me in." Warren looked at him with the particular expression of a man who recognizes a strategy and isn't sure yet whether to resent it. "You're capable of running that analysis yourself." "I am," Ethan said. "Your read on Unit C's pressure history is better than mine. I don't know this equipment's full biography. You do." A pause. "You talked to Marianne about me." It wasn't quite an accusation. "I suggested she find ways to include your expertise rather than work around it," Ethan said. "That's what I told her, nothing more." Warren stared at him for a moment. "Why?" "Because you know this floor, and because a man who knows something valuable shouldn't be sidelined just because he had one bad day." Ethan held his gaze. "We're going to have to work together for a long time. I'd rather do that as colleagues than as adversaries. That's not strategy, that's just practical." Warren looked at his desk, then at Ethan. Then he picked up the diagnostic report and handed it back. Unit C's anomaly on the pressure cycle started 8 months ago. There was a partial seal replacement that addressed the visible symptom, but not the root cause. It's been compensating since then. He pointed at 3 specific data points on the report. "Watch those. The root cause is still in there." Ethan took the report. He looked at the 3 points. He nodded. "Thank you." That was how it went. Not dramatically. Not with grand gestures or resolved conflicts that wrapped cleanly at the edges. The way real things go, slowly, imperfectly, with occasional backslides and recalibrations and a gradual accumulation of small moments that don't announce themselves as significant, but build into something that is. At the 70-day mark, Marianne did the salary review she'd promised. She called Ethan to her office on a Tuesday and told him she was moving his compensation to $68,000 retroactive to his full status date with a performance bonus that covered the Delco situation formally and on the record. "Feldstein called me," she said, "from Delco. He wanted to personally note that our proactive equipment disclosure had elevated Cross Industrial in their vendor evaluation. He said, and I'm paraphrasing, that the facilities that flag problems before they become disasters are the ones worth trusting with long-term contracts." She paused. He specifically asked about the technician who'd made the call. Ethan was quiet. "I told him your name," she said. "He asked if you'd be the primary contact on the Delco account going forward." The weight of that landed differently than the original job offer. The job offer had been about survival, a door opening when he'd been running out of doors. This was something else. This was a building he was being asked to help construct. "That's a big responsibility," he said. "Yes," she said simply. "Are you ready for it?" He thought about the accumulator fracture. He thought about the 6 photographs on his phone, and the 4 minutes at the terminal, and the particular clarity of knowing something was wrong, even when the official record said otherwise. He thought about Warren in the doorway of the supervisor's office, choosing honesty. He thought about Noah's solar system poster planets and moons and ice rings, moving at 53,000 miles an hour. "Yes," he said. The Delco recertification happened on a Thursday 3 weeks after the rescheduled date. Full operational load, all units running the Feldstein team, moving through the facility with clipboards and certification tablets and the careful, attentive eyes of people who got paid to find what other people missed. Ethan ran the floor that day alongside Dale and Warren. It was the first time the 3 of them had operated as a functioning unit rather than a triangle of competing priorities, and the coordination was real, not perfect, but real in the way that matters. Warren caught a temperature irregularity on Unit D at 10:43 and flagged it to Ethan immediately without politics, without hesitation. Ethan rerouted the load distribution on the fly, keeping the production run steady, while Warren supervised a real-time adjustment to the cooling cycle. Feldstein's team, watching from the observation line, noticed the adjustment. Feldstein found Ethan during the lunch break and shook his hand. "That's exactly what we need to see," he said. "Not a perfect floor. A floor that knows how to respond when something isn't perfect." "That's the job," Ethan said. "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple, but it's clear." The certification came back full compliance. Marianne got the result notification on her phone at 4:17 p.m., and she walked down to the floor herself to tell the team, which she didn't typically do. She usually sent the word through Diane. The fact that she came down personally was not lost on anyone present. She found Ethan at the monitoring hub running end-of-day system checks. She stood beside him for a moment, looking at the screens. "Full compliance," she said. "Good. Warren tell you about Dee's cooling cycle issue before or after Feldstein's team came through?" "Before. 20 minutes before." She nodded. "He's finding his footing." "He is," Ethan said. "He's a good man. He was just stuck." Marianne was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I want to talk to you about the next quarter. There's a contract possibility with Meridian Industrial larger than Delco, more complex. It's going to require someone to lead the technical compliance team." Ethan kept his eyes on the screens. "How large is the team?" "8 people. Cross-facility. You'd be coordinating with our Pittsburgh location as well as here." "That's a leadership role." "Yes." He turned to look at her. "I'm 90 days in." "You're 90 days in, and you've already changed the way this floor operates," she said. She wasn't being flattering. Marianne Cross didn't do flattery. She was stating what she observed. "I told you when we sat down in that interview that I hire for character first. Character at scale is leadership. You've been leading since week 3. I'd be paying you for something you're already doing." He stood there for a moment looking at her. "I'd want to bring Marcus in as deputy," he said. "He knows this floor cold, and he's better with people than he gets credit for." "Done. And I'd want Warren as the senior technical consultant on the Meridian bid. His credentials carry weight with industrial clients, and he'll step up if he's invited in rather than looked past." Marianne looked at him for a long moment. "You keep advocating for him." "He advocated for me once," Ethan said. "In the accumulator office. He could have let the conversation go the other way, and nobody would have thought less of him for it. He chose honesty when it cost him something." He paused. "That's worth something. It's worth being remembered." She studied him for another second. Then she said quietly, almost to herself, "I knew the night I read your note." He waited. "That you were someone worth finding." She straightened. "I'll have the Meridian proposal on your desk Monday." She walked back toward the elevator. He turned back to the monitoring screens. "Unit A, Unit B. The replaced accumulator bladder running clean and perfectly. Now its pressure cycle smooth and consistent and right. Unit C with Warren's 3 flag data points that Ethan checked every day without fail. Unit D with its cooling cycle watched and managed." He thought about a parking lot in November. A cracked phone, and $11 in a bank account and a gas station receipt, and a piece of handwriting in the rain. He thought about what it cost to leave a note, what it turned out to be worth. He finished his system checks. He clocked out. He drove to Mrs. Okafor's and picked up Noah, and on the drive home, Noah told him that he'd gotten a 94 on his solar system project and that his teacher had put it on the bulletin board outside the classroom. "She said it was the most detailed research she'd seen in 3rd grade, Noah said. "That's because you actually did the research," Ethan said. "You didn't just look at the pictures, you read the actual information and you understood it. You helped. I told you about the ice rings. That was 3 sentences. But they were the right 3 sentences." Ethan glanced in the rearview mirror. Noah was looking out the window with the quiet satisfaction of a child who had worked hard at something and had it acknowledged. It was such a specific kind of look, one that didn't require any response, just witness. "Yeah, buddy," Ethan said softly. They were. He drove the rest of the way home with one hand, easy on the wheel, and the city sliding past outside, and he didn't try to hold any of the day's events in a particular shape or make them mean more than they meant. He just let them be what they were. A door that had kept opening one room at a time because he'd been willing to do the one thing that mattered most at every step. He'd told the truth. He'd done the right thing. He'd shown up. And the rooms had kept coming. The Meridian Industrial proposal landed on Ethan's desk Monday morning, the way Marianne had promised, a thick folder with a yellow sticky note on top in her precise handwriting that said simply, 8 weeks. Make it count. He read the full proposal before 9 a.m. Then he read it again. Meridian was larger than Delco in every measurable way. Larger contract value. More complex compliance requirements. A facility audit component that would require Cross-Industrial to demonstrate not just equipment integrity, but systemic operational culture. The kind of audit that couldn't be staged or dressed up for a single day. The kind that revealed who a company actually was when nobody was performing. He thought, that's the kind we'll pass. He brought Marcus in at 9:30 and laid the folder open on the desk between them. Marcus read the summary page, looked up and said, 8 weeks. 8 weeks. To build a cross-facility compliance team and present to Meridian's technical board. Yes? Marcus sat back. He was quiet for a moment, the particular quiet of a man taking the measure of something before deciding how he feels about it. Then he said, I'm in, obviously. Deputy lead, Ethan said. You run the people side. I run the technical documentation and the audit prep. People side, Marcus repeated. You mean you want me to handle Warren? Ethan almost smiled. I want you to handle the team dynamics while I focus on equipment and compliance architecture. Warren is part of that, yes. Warren's been different since the accumulator thing, Marcus said. You notice that? I notice everything. He came in early last Thursday, pulled maintenance logs on Unit C on his own. The 3 data points you flagged, he cross-referenced them against the service records going back 2 years. Marcus paused. He found something. A replacement part from 22 months ago that wasn't spec-matched correctly. Nobody caught it at the time. Ethan was still. Did he flag it? Brought it straight to Dale. No announcement, no theater. Just brought it in and said, here's what I found, and here's what we need to do about it. Marcus looked at him. That's not the Warren from 6 weeks ago. No, Ethan said. It's not. He went to Warren's office that afternoon. Warren was at his terminal, deep in operational data, and he looked up when Ethan knocked with the expression of a man who had been working hard and didn't mind being interrupted because the work was going well. Marcus told me about Unit C, Ethan said. The mismatched part. 22 months in service on a part that should have been flagged at installation, Warren said. The vendor substituted without documenting the spec change. It's been compensating through the pressure calibration the whole time. How long until it becomes a problem? 3 to 6 months at current load levels. Less if we push to Meridian demonstration specs during the audit. He turned back to his screen and pulled up a parts order. Already requisitioned the correct replacement. It'll be here Thursday. Ethan stood in the doorway for a moment. Warren, I want you on the Meridian Technical Consultation Team. Senior advisor. Your credentials are going to matter to their board, and your knowledge of this facility's equipment history is something I genuinely can't replicate. Warren turned and looked at him directly. You cleared that with Marianne. She approved it when I mentioned it last week, but I wanted to ask you directly, not just assign you. Ethan paused. I'd rather have you choose to be part of this than feel like you were drafted into it. Something shifted in Warren's face, not dramatically, but it shifted in the particular way of a man who had been waiting without quite knowing he was waiting to be asked rather than managed. Yeah, Warren said. I'm in. Good. Ethan started to turn. Cole. He stopped. Warren leaned back in his chair and looked at him with an expression that was somewhere between candor and difficulty, the way honesty looks when it's still slightly uncomfortable for the person delivering it. I owe you something I haven't said yet. You don't owe me. I do. Warren said it firmly, without heat. I pushed back on your accumulator flag because I felt threatened by you, not because the data supported pushing back. I dressed it up as 18 years of experience and institutional knowledge, but underneath that... He stopped. I saw a man who Marianne brought in personally, and I decided the threat was bigger than the evidence. That was wrong. He held Ethan's gaze. That kind of wrong could have hurt somebody. The room was quiet. I know, Ethan said. I've been doing this work for 18 years, and I have never let something like that happen before. The fact that it almost happened under my watch because I was more worried about my position than the floor. Warren shook his head once, a sharp motion. That's not who I am. It's who you were for one day, Ethan said, under pressure, in a situation that felt threatening. And when it mattered, you said you were wrong. He met Warren's eyes. That's who you are. The rest was a bad day. Warren looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked up the parts requisition from his desk and held it up briefly, a gesture that was almost a toast. Thursday, he said. Unit C gets fixed right. Thursday. Ethan agreed. He walked back to his desk and pulled the Meridian folder open and started building the 8-week plan. The weeks that followed were the kind that don't feel significant while you're inside them, because you're too busy to stop and take the measure of what's happening. The team came together with the particular organic efficiency that forms when the right people are pointed in the same direction and trusted to do their jobs. Marcus handled the interpersonal architecture of it with the relaxed authority of someone who had always had this capability and just needed to be given the room. Emma ran the documentation trail with the meticulous precision that was simply her operating mode. Warren's historical knowledge of the facility's equipment turned out to be invaluable in ways that even Ethan hadn't fully anticipated. There were maintenance decisions made 4 and 7 and 11 years ago that had downstream effects on current equipment behavior that only someone with Warren's institutional memory could have mapped. The Pittsburgh coordination was harder. The facility manager there, a man named Carroll, was accustomed to running his location as a self-contained operation and was skeptical about cross-facility alignment led by someone he'd never met who was only 5 months into his tenure at the primary location. Ethan flew to Pittsburgh for 2 days in the 5th week. He didn't go in with authority or a power structure or anything that would make Carroll feel managed. He went in the way he'd always operated with the work itself, with specificity, with the willingness to listen before he spoke, and to acknowledge what Pittsburgh was doing right before he discussed what needed to change. By the end of day 2, Carroll was calling him by his first name, and had voluntarily proposed 3 process improvements that Ethan had been planning to suggest. He flew home Thursday evening and picked Noah up from Mrs. Okafor's at 7:30. Noah was asleep in the car before they were out of her neighborhood, which was unusual. Noah typically had things to report on the way home, observations and questions that had been accumulating since school. Ethan glanced in the rearview mirror at his son's face, slack in sleep. The 9-year-old angles of it softened in a way that made him look very young. He thought about Claire. Not with the raw grief that had defined the first year after losing her, and not with the particular guilt that had chased the second year, the guilt of a man who wondered constantly whether he was doing enough. Being enough, whether Noah was okay in the ways that a child who'd lost his mother needed to be okay. He thought about her the way he'd learned slowly and imperfectly to think about her with love and steadiness, and the particular gratitude of a man who'd been changed by someone completely and who tried every day to make that change count. He thought she would have liked Marianne. They would have argued about everything and agreed about what mattered. He carried Noah in from the car, which he hadn't had to do in over a year, because Noah was getting too heavy for it, and also insisted he was too old. Noah didn't wake up. Ethan got him into bed, pulled the blanket up, and stood in the doorway for a moment in the dark. No nightlight. The room dark and quiet and peaceful in the way that had become ordinary now, which was its own kind of miracle. The Meridian presentation was on a Wednesday in the 7th week. 8 board members, a technical review panel, and a compliance director named Harrison, who had the reputation of being the most demanding evaluator in Meridian's vendor selection process. The cross-industrial team was Ethan, Warren, Marcus, Emma, and Diane, who had come along not because Marianne sent her, but because Diane had asked to be included, and Marianne had said yes. Marianne herself sat in the back of the room during the presentation. She didn't participate. She was there as a presence, a signal that the company's leadership was paying attention. Ethan had asked her to let him run the room, and she had said yes without argument, which he took as the highest possible form of professional trust. He opened by doing something that surprised the Meridian board. He told them about the accumulator, not as a story, as a case study in operational culture. He walked them through the timeline, the initial flag, the internal pushback, the second inspection, the physical discovery, the proactive client communication, the rescheduled certification, and the full compliance result. He put the data on the screen. He was specific and clinical and honest about the fact that the initial pushback had come from experienced senior staff and that the flag had been made by a technician 5 weeks into his tenure. What I'm describing, he said, is not a perfect system. It's a responsive one. The difference is that in a perfect system, nothing goes wrong. In a responsive system, when something goes wrong, and it will, the people on that floor are trained, empowered, and expected to say so immediately, regardless of the cost to the schedule or the politics of the moment. He paused. That's the culture I can offer you, not perfection, honesty. Harrison, the compliance director, had been leaning back in his chair with the careful, neutral expression of a man who had heard many presentations. He sat forward. "The technician who made the flag," he said. "That was you." "Yes, sir." 5 weeks in. "Yes." "And there was senior staff resistance." "There was, and that staff member is here today." Ethan looked briefly at Warren, who was seated to his left, and then back at Harrison. Because the measure of a culture isn't whether people make mistakes. It's what they do after. Warren Hodge has been running advanced systems at Cross Industrial for 18 years. The day after the accumulator call, he said he was wrong. Then he went back to work. That's the kind of senior staff I want in the room when Meridian Systems needs someone with 18 years of facility knowledge on their side. Harrison looked at Warren. Warren met the look without blinking. "I pushed back on the right call because I let my own position feel more important than the data. It won't happen again." He said it the way he'd said you were right in the supervisor's office, flat clean, without apology or embellishment. Just the truth. Harrison looked from Warren back to Ethan. Something in his expression had changed, not dramatically, but perceptibly. The careful neutrality had given way to something more attentive. "Mr. Cole," he said, "what does a long-term partnership with Cross Industrial look like for Meridian?" Ethan answered the question. He had the answer ready because he'd been building it for 8 weeks, because he believed in it, because it was true. He laid out the compliance framework, the cross-facility coordination model, the maintenance response protocol, the documentation trail. He was specific, and he was confident in the way that comes not from performance, but from knowing your work. When the presentation ended and the board stepped out to deliberate, Mary Ann walked up from the back of the room and stood beside Ethan. She didn't say anything for a moment. She was looking at the screen where the cross-industrial compliance framework was still displayed. "The accumulator," she said quietly. "You opened with it." "It's the best thing we have," Ethan said. "It's real. Everything else we're offering, the framework, the protocol, the culture, it would all be theoretical if we didn't have that moment to point to." He paused. "Stories prove things that documents can't." She looked at him. "Where did you learn that?" He thought about a parking lot in November, about $11, about a piece of receipt paper folded under a windshield wiper. "Experience," he said. Meridian awarded the contract 4 days later. Harrison called Ethan directly, not through Mary Ann, not through Diane, but to Ethan's direct line, and told him that the compliance team's honesty in the presentation had been the deciding factor over 2 competitors with longer track records. "Longer track records," Ethan said. "You beat companies that have been doing this for 20 years, Harrison said. "I want you to know that, because I want you to understand what I'm telling you when I say it was the culture that won it, not the credentials, the culture." Ethan thanked him, ended the call, and sat at his desk for a moment. Then he called Noah's school and left a message for his teacher asking if it was okay to pick Noah up 30 minutes early because they had something to celebrate. They went to the diner on Callaway Street that Noah had been requesting for 3 months, a place with booths and checkered floors and milkshakes that came in metal mixing cups and were entirely too large for a 9-year-old but were never complained about. Noah got chocolate. Ethan got coffee. They sat in a corner booth, and Noah ate about half the milkshake and listened to Ethan tell him in simplified terms about the contract. "So they picked your company," Noah said. "They picked our team's work." But you were the one who did the presentation. I was the one who presented what the team built. That's different. Noah considered this with the deliberate concentration he brought to things that deserved it. But you started the whole thing, back at the parking lot. Ethan looked at him. How do you know about the parking lot? Noah gave him the look, the 9-year-old version of "come on" that was somehow already extremely effective. Dad, you wrote a note on a car. I know about it. Mrs. Okafor told you. She said it was the bravest thing she'd heard of in a long time. Ethan looked at his coffee for a moment. It wasn't brave, he said. It was just right. Those are different things. What's the difference? He looked up at his son. The careful eyes, the serious face, the milkshake mustache that Noah hadn't noticed, and that Ethan was going to let him have a little longer because it was perfect. Brave means it scared you, but you did it anyway, Ethan said. Doing the right thing when you do it enough times stops being scary. It just becomes who you are. He paused. The goal is to get to the point where being honest and being you are the same thing. So it doesn't take courage anymore. It just takes showing up. Noah was quiet for a moment. Then, is that what the Navy taught you? The Navy taught me a lot of things about systems and equipment and how to function when conditions are bad. The honest part, he shook his head slightly. Your mom taught me that one. She was the most honest person I've ever known. Honest in a way that wasn't harsh, in a way that was kind and clear at the same time. He paused. That's the hardest kind to be. Noah nodded slowly. He picked up the metal cup and drank from the straw for a moment. Then he set it down and looked at Ethan. I think she'd be really proud of you, Dad. The diner kept moving around them, plates clattering, a table of loud teenagers by the window, a couple arguing quietly about something ordinary, the waitress refilling coffee without being asked. All of it ordinary and real and present. Ethan looked at his son's face for a long moment and let the words settle into him the way things settle when they're true. Yeah, buddy, he said quietly. I think she would. 6 months after the day he wrote a note on a slate gray Mercedes in a dark parking lot, Ethan Cole was promoted to Senior Operations Director at Cross Industrial Solutions. It came with a formal announcement, a meeting with the board, and a salary that made the math he'd done at midnight, $11, 3 jobs, no margin, feel like it had happened in a different life, because in almost every way that mattered, it had. He kept the original note. He'd found it folded in the glove compartment of the CRV a few weeks after his first day at Cross Industrial, tucked it into the inside pocket of his work bag, and somewhere along the way, it had migrated to his desk drawer at home, where he kept the things that mattered. Noah's first drawing, Claire's watch, his Navy commendation certificate. It wasn't sentimental exactly. Or maybe it was, but the right kind. The kind that doesn't ask you to live in the past, but just reminds you of the moment when things turned so you know what turning looks like when it's happening. The afternoon of his promotion, Mary Ann called him into her office one last time. Not for paperwork or logistics. Diane handled logistics, but for the same reason she'd called him in on all the important occasions, to talk straight. How does it feel? She asked. Like something I want to earn every day I have it, he said. She nodded. That's the right answer. Not because it's what I wanted to hear, because it's the only answer that's actually useful. She looked at him for a moment. You know what I thought when I read your note that morning? When I was standing in the parking lot, and I unfolded that piece of gas station receipt paper and read it. He waited. I thought whoever this person is, they're someone who does the hard thing even when it costs them. And I thought that is the rarest possible thing in a human being. She paused. I was right. He looked at her. This woman who had seen something in a parking lot note that had changed his life, who had made a call based on character when the easier, safer, more conventional choice would have been to handle the car damage and move on. You took a risk, he said. Hiring me the way you did. I never said that directly. You've paid it back 10 times over. Still, it was a risk, and you didn't have to take it. She looked at him with the particular expression of someone who has thought about something carefully and has a clear answer. I hire for character, she said. When I find it, I don't walk past it. That's not risk. That's just knowing what matters. She extended her hand across the desk. "Congratulations, Ethan." He shook it. And this time, unlike the first time in this office when his hands were steadier than his life deserved, he felt the full weight of the moment, not with anxiety or disbelief, but with the solid, grounded certainty of a man who had walked a long road to a place that fit him correctly. That evening he picked up Noah, and they drove home the long way. The route that took them past the Westgate complex, past the parking lot where a 2009 CR-V had caught the corner panel of a slate gray Mercedes on a November night that had changed everything. Ethan didn't point it out. He wasn't sure if he was doing it on purpose or not. But as he drove past, he looked at the parking lot briefly, the section with the half-dead lights that he'd once known from the inside of the maintenance work order. And then he looked back at the road ahead of him. Noah was in the back seat asking about whether astronauts dreamed differently in space. Ethan answered him. The city moved past outside. The lights were coming on in the buildings as the evening settled in, and there was something in the way the light spread across the street that was uncomplicated and good. He had dinner at home that night, as he did most nights now. He helped Noah with his reading assignment, checked his backpack, and sat on the edge of Noah's bed, while Noah told him a long and increasingly elaborate story about a class field trip that Ethan suspected had been embellished significantly from the actual events, but that he listened to completely and with full attention. Noah fell asleep mid-sentence the way kids do when they've held themselves up through sheer narrative momentum, and the momentum finally runs out. Ethan sat there for another minute in the dark, listening to his son breathe. Then he turned off the lamp, closed the door, and went to sit at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, the same kitchen table where 6 months ago he'd done the terrifying math of 3 jobs and $11 and a damaged car he couldn't afford. He sat there quietly for a little while. He thought about everything it had taken to get here, the deployments, the years, the loss of Claire, the 3 jobs, the exhaustion that had become a kind of weather. He thought about a rainy night and a crumpled piece of paper, and the decision that hadn't felt like a decision at all, because it was simply what a man did when he knew who he was. Some people spent their whole lives trying to figure out what they were made of. Ethan Cole had found out in a dark parking lot with $11 in his account and nobody watching. It turned out he was made of exactly the right thing, and he had built everything else from there.